The Department of Justice is making an exception to its decades-long policy of not interfering in elections just weeks before Election Day. The change comes after President Trump's continued undermining of the U.S. electoral system's integrity. ProPublica reports the DOJ's Public Integrity Section sent an email last week saying federal investigators can publicly look into suspected election fraud before the polls close. The memo specifically mentions potential misconduct by USPS workers and military employees. President Trump has falsely accused both groups of assisting in voter fraud. For more, I want to bring in Justin Elliott. He's a reporter for ProPublica covering this story and joins us now from New York. Justin, thanks very much for being with us. What's the rationale behind the DOJ's recent change?
Well, there actually isn't one given. This is a policy that has existed since at least 1980, and the basic concept is you don't want the powerful Department of Justice to make announcements around Election Day that could be used by sort of one side or the other. They've announced a significant exception. They actually did not give a rationale.
Well, you also report, Justin, that Attorney General Bill Barr sent a memo to federal prosecutors reminding them to be, quote, particularly sensitive to safeguarding the department's reputation for fairness, neutrality, and nonpartisanship regarding election-related crimes. But last month, the Justice Department announced it was looking into potentially illegally discarded mail-in military ballots. So how does that public announcement actually square with that earlier memo?
Well, certain former Justice Department officials we spoke to believe that announcement was a violation of the memo. What happened last month is that a U.S. attorney in Pennsylvania, so this is the top federal prosecutor in one section of Pennsylvania, put out a very unusual announcement saying that they had found 9 discarded ballots in an election office. And the announcement actually seemed to go out of its way to say that most of those ballots were votes for President Trump. One of the remarkable things about that announcement, besides the fact that it happened at all, is that President Trump himself had somehow found out about it before the announcement and actually raised it on an interview on Fox News. So for several former DOJ folks we spoke to, that what happened in Pennsylvania last month is actually the kind of nightmare scenario where you see apparently the powers of the Justice Department being used to help the incumbent, in this case President Trump, sort of craft this narrative about voter fraud that appears to be baseless.
And Justin, give us some context here. Help us understand this exception memo. What would have been the normal procedure if there had been some suspected voter fraud in the past?
Sure. So first of all, the normal procedure for the Justice Department when it comes to voter fraud or any other crime is not to simply go out there and announce to the public that they're doing an investigation. If you think about that for a second, it makes sense. One of the reasons for that is, of course, sometimes prosecutors investigate tips or allegations of crimes, and it turns out that there is no crime there, and you don't want to sort of smear innocent people. That's one big reason they don't typically talk about their investigations before bringing charges. Now, the so-called non-interference policy when it comes to the election period actually goes further than that, and it said so. Federal prosecutors are, first of all, not supposed to announce that they're doing investigations, but historically, they're not supposed to actually take what they describe as overt investigative steps in election fraud cases around Election Day. So that would be something like making an arrest in a case or potentially subpoenaing a witness. The thinking around this policy has been if you start taking steps that could easily become public, like sending out a subpoena to a witness that could easily get into the press, you're going to give the opportunity to one side or the other to say, hey, look, the feds are investigating my opponent and therefore vote for me. And historically, the Justice Department has not wanted to allow itself to be used as sort of a political talking point for either in an election. And so the policy has been, unless there's some sort of extraordinary circumstance, to hold off on taking those steps until the election has actually been settled. And then if there was some sort of fraud or other voting crime, it would be pursued after the election was done.
So then, with all of that in mind, Justin, how could this new exception potentially affect the election, which is now just a few weeks away?
Sure. So the fear of several former Justice Department folks that we spoke to is that we could see more cases like this Pennsylvania announcement, where again a U.S. attorney who parenthetically was nominated by President Trump originally could come out and make a sort of sensationalistic announcement saying we're investigating reports of fraud in the election. And then that could be seized on by President Trump to sort of fuel this narrative that there's widespread voter fraud, which all the experts say is not true. And maybe 2 or 3 months later, the investigations that have been announced will not turn anything up. But at that point, the damage will have already been done because this has been out there in public. So that's the fear. We don't know if that's going to happen yet, but the folks we spoke to said, in this context, potentially take what you're hearing from the Justice Department with a grain of salt when it comes to allegations or investigations of election fraud.
Right, but as you point out, as has been pointed out by many researchers, time and time again, there has been no evidence of widespread voter fraud when it comes to our elections here in the U.S. All right, Justin Elliott for us. Justin, thank you very much.
Thanks so much.